Hello everybody, I'm Shmaya, it's like papaya except it's not, and this is Plot Twist Please. As you can see, I am in kind of a new location. I'm in my room, which I usually am not in. I'm usually in the common area in my apartment or the living room. And today I'm turning over a new leaf because I started redecorating my room, and I'll probably vlog this to some of y'all later. But I have this new chair that was gifted to me. It's a vintage chair with a cute little picture on it. And really soon for my setup, I want to have some stringy lights, maybe some plants hanging. I want it to be this kind of vintage, warm, serene oasis. And I'm really excited for that transformation. And if you don't know, I'm kind of obsessed with interior design, so I'm getting a lot of inspiration from different shows. Yeah, I'm excited for that, and I'm excited for y'all to be part of that too. How have y'all been? Have y'all been well? Have we been eating, sleeping, meditating? What have we been watching lately? I just started watching Loki on Netflix. Is it Netflix or something else? I don't know. I don't know which one it's on, but I just started watching it. And y'all, the hype is real, but it's like valid. The hype is valid. So, getting into today's little chat, I was thinking about all of the things that are happening, the controversy that's going on with the Olympics and Simone Biles and Sha'Carri Richardson, Naomi Osaka, and the idea of black women resting and why it's so controversial. Because it shouldn't be. So, how did we get to the point where black women doing something for themselves has become such a hot button topic and something that a lot of people are confused about? And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today as a black woman, obviously, and so being someone who likes to be mobile. I like to have things to do. I tend to have a lot of things to do. I'm an actor, singer, writer, and I also do content creation. And I have a 9-to-5, so that's a lot of things. And the thing with being a black woman in Western society is you a lot of the time do have to wear a lot of hats. And it can be kind of impossible to find moments to rest because of what society requires of you. And so I really wanted to talk about that, and more specifically, what within our culture, within American culture, and also within black culture makes us as black women feel obligated to keep moving and to never pause, especially in regards to pouring back into ourselves, what we so readily offer to everyone else, and what we are so expected to offer to everyone else. So, first of all, we need to answer the question, are black women suffering? Is there a need for rest? And I'm gonna throw a few statistics at y'all real quick, so brace yourselves, hang on tight. According to the Black Women's Health Imperative, the number of black women reporting levels of depression is higher than that of white women. For example, 3.9% of black women report feeling sadness as opposed to the 2.9% of white women. 2.4% of black women report feeling hopelessness as opposed to the 1.9% of white women. And 1.8% of black women report feeling worthless in comparison to 1.6% of white women. And according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or specifically OMH, 10% of black women report feeling like everything's an effort in comparison to 6% of white women. Now, we're not to play the oppression Olympics here, even though I think that term gets kind of thrown around in ways that aren't productive and that don't actually push any kind of conversation, any sort of worthwhile conversation forward. I don't see the use for such a term as oppression Olympics. But it's not to compare to say that white women don't experience trauma, don't experience depression, don't have mental illnesses. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. Of course not. Everyone can be susceptible to such experiences, and anyone can have a mental illness. But when it pertains to black women, societally, there's a lot more at stake, and there's a lot more that we have to carry, generally. And this is researched. Black women tend to suffer from depression and other kinds of mental illnesses and have other kinds of mental struggles due to environmental situations, genetics, biology, and other psychological complications. Now, the environmental struggles can include growing up in poverty, growing up in abusive situations, having an abusive spouse, or any kind of childhood trauma that makes you more susceptible to having a mental illness later in life, or suffering later in life due to your mental health. When it comes to genetics, some things like depression are passed on through your DNA. And also, I am autistic, as y'all know. If you didn't know, welcome to my autistic world. Autism is also something that is passed on through genetics. It is not caused by vaccines. My vaccine did not give me autism. But autism is something that is passed on throughout your bloodline. And not saying that autism is something that needs to be cured. It is just something that complicates your life. And as a person of color, as a Black woman, it definitely complicates my life. I wouldn't be who I am without it. But it definitely makes things more difficult due to the way that society is structured. Biological, this one is interesting. Physical changes in your environment and side effects of certain medications can make you be more susceptible to experiencing depression or to having depressive episodes. And can I get a psychological? The way you approach certain situations habitually might make you more susceptible or vulnerable to depression. And in correlation with the psychological aspects, we can also throw in there experiences of racial trauma on a daily basis. And I think something that people need to recognize is that racial trauma isn't necessarily someone being overtly racist toward you or calling you a racial slur. Racial trauma can literally be you existing in a space with predominantly white people, and you are a person of color, and you have to go through the mental gymnastics of having to perform whatever version of your identity that will be palatable to the white people around you. That can be traumatizing, and it can really mess you up. It can really wreck your brain, y'all. That stuff carries on over time in the public education system. If you go to a private institution and you're surrounded by people who cannot possibly understand your point of view, who fetishize you, or who utilize you as a token and see you for what you are rather than who you are, especially when we're talking about dating. Oh God, I can't even, ooh y'all, that's gonna be a whole nother op-ed or something, because dating when you go to a PWI, it's a mess. It's a mess and a half. I gotta wipe my eyebrow, I'm sweating, it's such a mess. Not even only as it pertains to dating, but also when we're talking about friendships and developing close bonds with people. That can be really difficult when you go to a predominantly white institution, which is what PWI means, if you didn't know. PWI, predominantly white institution. Now you know. If you go to one of those kinds of schools, or if you work in that kind of environment, it can be extremely hard to find people who genuinely connect with you and genuinely want to connect with you. I saw a really interesting TikTok that asked the question to Black people, what kind of white person do you attract? And a lot of people started stitching it. If you don't know what stitching is, welcome. Stitching is basically you can attach your video to someone else's video in response to it. So it'll show part of that person's video, and then it'll show your response to that video. So I saw a lot of Black people stitching, oh, like I attract the white vegans or the hippies or the corporate America types or the, you know, the muscly gym rats, or, you know, the ones who think that they are practicing anti-racism. I don't know, but something particularly interesting about that kind of deep dive that I went down going through everyone's videos was when it came to dark-skinned Black women, specifically not dark-skinned Black men, but dark-skinned Black women. They reported not attracting any kind of white person because white people generally do not flock to them, which was really interesting because I obviously have privilege as a light-skinned Black woman, because people do feel safe around me. White people specifically do feel safe around me because I'm a lighter skin tone. But when it comes to Black women, and even more specifically, dark-skinned Black women who are not size 2s or size 4s, you know, people are intimidated by them. And so a lot of white people do not see them as a safe Black person. And so developing relationships, I can imagine, in a workplace or in an educational environment that has predominantly white people in it, Must be hard to find those kinds of friendships, those solid, genuine friendships with white people. I'd imagine that could be really lonely, and that could also contribute to depressive episodes or to heightening any kind of mental state that you're in, and really being damaging long term to your mental health. Because also, if we think about the aspect of community and how much people of color rely on that, how embedded it is into our culture, and I know for the Black community, a lot of it has to do with community. A lot of it has to do with leaning on your brother or your sister or your friend or your cousin. It's about the village. It takes a village to raise a child. And so that aspect of it is so rich and ingrained in who we are as people. I can imagine how detrimental that could be to a Black person's mental health in a predominantly white institution. And a lot of the reasons why we as people, as Black people, have been able to survive for so long is because of our communities, because of our relationships. That keeps us sane. And I don't mean that flippantly. It literally keeps us sane. And I can't imagine what it would be like to go through racism on a daily basis alone. That was kind of a little tangent, but we're going to reel it back, even though that still has to do with my point. It also needs to be noted that Black women are often not accounted for in clinical trials. So a lot of the statistics that are like, this is how much women are getting paid, or this is how much women are actually having long-term relationships, or this is how much they're having sex, or etc. A lot of those accounts don't take into consideration Black women's experiences because we're not part of that pool, or not enough of us are part of that pool. And that also comes back to the psychology field and how a lot of diagnoses are difficult for Black women to acquire because there are literally not studies done on us. So the way that autism or ADHD or any kind of mental illness or any kind of disability, mental disability, manifests itself in us throughout our lives, a lot of that is not accounted for when psychologists are studying in grad school, or when they're doing their undergrad and they take that one course on autism or that one course on ADHD or on mental disabilities. A lot of our experiences aren't accounted for, so it's difficult for a lot of us to get diagnosed with anything. And a lot of psychologists and therapists are biased. And so, like, even for me, when I was seeking some sort of explanation for these tendencies that I now understand to be autistic tendencies, a lot of therapists just didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to first of all, talk to me in a way that was understandable for me. I often had to ask for clarification on certain things, or ask, what exactly do you mean by that? Is this a legitimate question, or are you, is this a hypothetical? Or a lot of them just really do not know how to talk to neurodivergent people, specifically neurodivergent Black people. And so that also creates a barrier when it pertains to mental health and when it pertains to finding some sort of mental wellness routine through the therapeutic route. And mixed diagnoses also, a lot of the time, things that are autism or ADHD or bipolar disorder or, etc., are often simply chalked up to anxiety or depression. Not simply as if those are simple and as if those are easy things to experience, but having a mental illness or a mental disability goes a lot deeper than what many therapists or psychology professionals seem to recognize. The disparities that many Black women face when it comes to the healthcare system include lack of access to quality healthcare. That's something that I personally have experienced. Higher rates in chronic illnesses, having to advocate for ourselves more in the doctor's office, and people not taking us seriously, people not taking our pain seriously, our physical pain as well as our mental pain. Higher maternal mortality rates, that's a real thing, and I'll leave some statistics below and some sources for you to study that further, as well as higher blood pressure and heart conditions. So we know that Black women are suffering. We know that we are humans. We know that we are people who experience health difficulties physically and mentally and emotionally. So what is going on? Why is it that no one has addressed this? Why is it that people refuse to see us as human? Well, the easy answer is racism as an umbrella. But I really wanted to hone in on specifically the Black community. And yes, we know that white people don't think that we're human. We know that. Okay? And a lot of other non-Black people of color have a hard time viewing us as soft, viewing Black women as emotional beings who have full capacity to feel and to experience pain. And even though we've been through so much, we never should have had to. And that stuff takes a toll. It is embedded in our DNA. And I used to think that was some like woo-woo thing that only spiritual Black people were really into, but that's a real thing. Your DNA remembers trauma. So my ancestors who decades ago were working in the cotton fields were, trigger warning y'all, were being whipped, were being snatched away from their families. That pain, that trauma is still there. And I like to say this. I say, because it's so true. After slavery ended and we went through being beep, beep, going away from our families and having limbs cut off, y'all, and watching family members get killed, watching loved ones get stolen away from us, watching them suffer, watching them be in pain, feeling constant anxiety of not knowing who was going to leave next, who you were going to end up leaving. That stuff is still in my DNA. It's still there. My body remembers it. Even if you are mentally telling yourself to be over something, just like if you go through a breakup, if you're mentally telling yourself, girl, we're done, wipe it clean, we're not gonna think about this anymore, all right? Your body still remembers, and your body still has a process that it has to go through, whether you like it or not. And so when slavery ended, nobody checked in on us. Nobody said, hey, slaves, are y'all okay? Like, do we need a minute? Do we need to just go have a like self-love, self-care, just a minute even, just a minute? Because we didn't even get that. We were running for our lives and trying to set up some sort of stable household for the people who were left, some sort of stable situation for the people who were left. And not saying we didn't thrive through that, which is amazing, but that trauma is still there. And I think a lot of us within the Black community feel this pressure to keep pushing on, to keep trudging on, because of what our ancestors went through, and because we're like, hey, they survived. They did a wonderful, amazing things. They survived. They didn't go to therapy. And I do not blame the Black community, obviously, because it has been extremely difficult to get resources to maintain our mental health and to pour into ourselves because of societal standards, because of living in a capitalist society and being expected to constantly produce. And if you're a Black woman, you're expected to produce even at your own expense. Now, I talked about access to mental health resources. I talked about societal standards and how Black women being fully human does not necessarily correlate with capitalism and its expectations for Black women. Now I'm going to talk about generational trauma, misogynoir, and patriarchy, and other Black women's attitudes toward these things. The input of other Black women has contributed to such an environment and to such standards. Now, should we blame other Black women for misogynoir, for patriarchy, for racism? No. Black women, and specifically Black trans women, are at the bottom of the hierarchy when it comes to systemic change. Even though Black women are at the forefront of most movements within systemic change in the US, even though we are at the forefront of those movements, we often benefit the least. And it's because we are expected to labor for free. We are expected to constantly pour out of ourselves without asking for anything in return, without asking for compensation or recognition. It's this martyr mentality that has not served us. You keep giving something to someone and do not expect anything in return. That you are giving becomes less of a gift and more of a requirement. And the minute that they don't get that, the instance that they don't receive that from you, is when the whole script flips. Is when they really blow their top. Is when the tantrums come. It's when the entitlement comes. Because you've been giving it for free. You've been doing it for free. And then you're going to come around and say you expect me to do something? And so that's why I think a lot of people are confused, not justifying it at all. At all. People are people, and we should have seen them as people from the beginning, regardless of who our daddies were, regardless of who our mamas were, regardless of the environment we grew up in. People are still people and always have been. But I do think that this is a mind warp for a lot of white people. Seeing Black women expect to be compensated financially, seeing Black women expect to be given accolades for their hard work next to their white counterparts who do the same work that they do and who are getting those same accolades, it is a mind warp for them, because they're like, wait a minute, you were supposed to serve us. What's going on? And I think that this whole thing with Simone and Naomi and Sha'Carri is making people realize how much Black women have been taken advantage of for so long. And I think even more so, and the most important thing is it is helping Black women realize how much we have been taken advantage of and how much we can allot for ourselves in terms of mental health, in terms of physical health, in terms of spiritual, emotional health, and how central that is to our actual being. Now, talking about internalized racism and Black womanhood, a lot of Black women teach their children, teach their cousins and their nieces that Black women, the way that we show worth is through suffering and through labor. And I think back to the holiday season and of holiday seasons past, where I would see my mom and my aunt and my grandma working really hard in the kitchen to get dinner together or decorating around the house throughout the whole season, not just the 25th. I gotta celebrate Christmas, so not just the 25th, the 24th, but the entire month. It was labor. And I think a lot of households run that way, it's in the Black community specifically, where the woman is literally doing everything when it comes to the holiday season, and the man is writing the check. And, that's very heteronormative, but that's just what I see. And I think a lot of Black women are going to have to come to terms with the fact that we have reinstilled the same ideology of patriarchy within our own households, and we have made it an unhealthy place for Black women to dwell. We have made our houses emotionally unhealthy. And maybe part of that is feeling some sort of obligation to ascribe to this system that makes us feel like if we are not giving, then we have no worth. That if we are not constantly being elevated for our labor, then we have no inherent value. But that's not true. We have value outside of what we do. And I think specifically for Black women, that has been a survival skill for so long, just having to give and provide, that we were too afraid to ask for anything because we didn't think there was a space for it. And there kind of wasn't. There wasn't much. But what I'm loving about what I'm seeing now is that we are seeing that there's a license for this kind of conversation, and there is a space for us to take ownership of our well-being and to demand certain things. Now, there can be no space for that if white people do not provide it, or people in our own communities, in our own spaces. And that might be a little controversial to say, but I do think we need white people in a revolution because they have all the cards, they have all the capital, they have all the power. Inside of America, we're going to have to use some white people. Like, they're going to have to give us the space because we can't create that space if we don't have those assets. Now, if the wealthy Black people who have made it to the other side started offering up some of that capital and started pouring back into the community, then I think that'll be different. I think we'll be onto something once people start doing that consistently. I'm not saying that no one is doing that. If that was just the norm, just like white people practice nepotism from the top to the bottom, somebody's granddaddy owns something, so his great-great-grandson has all this fortune or has this business or has this production company. If we ascribe by the same thing of providing and focusing on creating generational wealth, and not even wealth, but just resources, and passing them on, I think we'd be in a different spot. I do. Now, going back to Black women in their households, I do think that a lot of Black women set up impossible standards for other Black women because we know what we had to do to get to where we are. Or it could be just sisterly love, looking out for your sister and not wanting you to embarrass yourself or wanting you to be the best you can be. But even that is coded in this type of anxiety that arises from living within a system that thrives off of capitalism and more specifically suppressing Black people. We see that as the only way, or a lot of Black people, a lot of Black women see that as the only route to success or as the only way to survive. And I can't necessarily fault them on that thought process because we do what we have to survive. But I do think that we should seriously consider what are the things that we are co-signing on our way to survival? How do we interact with the matrix of white supremacy in ways that can't negatively affect other Black people? Is there a way that we can interact with the matrix that pours into our communities and supports the well-being of our people, but also helps us thrive within the system? And I do not know if there's an answer to that. I do not know, because a cycle of self-preservation becomes self-affliction at a certain point. What we put out comes back to us. So the question remains, do we challenge the conditions or the conditioning? Whether we agree or disagree on how Black women should cope, I do think it's important to take a glance at how America has responded to Black women's suffering before we talk about what we need to do. So there was that whole Victoria's Secret debacle. And the thing that surprised me the most was that, and this probably shouldn't have surprised me, but for some reason it did, a lot of people were going to that white woman's aid to see if she was okay. But even after they realized that she was faking, no one went to the Black woman to see if she was okay. No one went to console her after being attacked by this white woman. She was attacked, okay? The white woman was chasing her around the store. She was attacked. No one came to her aid. No one tried to console her. Even after they knew that the white woman was faking, no one thought that this Black woman might have been going through something herself after experiencing something like that firsthand. The fear she must have been feeling, the frustration to have all this happening to her just in the open. And no one came to her aid. Nobody. And that is the most frustrating thing to witness, is that as a Black woman in this country, you cannot feel safe. The thing that I find really interesting is the contrast between a lot of white people in that moment, a lot of their responses to that Black woman, versus a lot of people's responses to Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and Sha'Carri Richardson. They're praising those women. They are supporting them overtly on social media, in their spaces. I don't know. I can imagine that they were like, oh, those Black women have been through so much. They've been through the ringer. We have put them through the ringer, and we should respect their need for mental and physical health and give them the space that they deserve. But no one thought that about this ordinary Black woman from this Victoria's Secret video. Nobody thought that about her. No one thought this woman deserves solace, deserves aid too. And that's the most frustrating thing, is it seems like the only thing that can make you as a Black woman human is if you have these superhuman capabilities. If you have these astronomical accolades, if you've done something phenomenal by society standards, then you are deemed worthy of rest, then you are deemed worthy of care. But if you're not a Serena Williams, if you're not an Oprah Winfrey, okay? If you're not a Simone Biles, if you're not a Beyonce, what use do we have for you? Is what it seems like they're saying. What use do we have for you? Why do you matter? For me, it's about the Simone Bileses of the world, but it's also about that Black woman at your supermarket. It's about the one who works a 9 to 5 and the one who's unemployed. It's about the one on your TV screen and the one you pass by on the street. It's about the one who meets your comfort level of Black excellence and the one who is struggling. They deserve your energy equally. I was going to go into a whole thing where I read out loud everything that critics have been saying about Simone in response to her taking her moment of rest after winning gold for America and, after being so young and literally being groundbreaking in every possible way. But I will read simply one, and then I don't want to give that energy anymore. Just to give you a glimpse on how people are responding to Black women finally saying enough. And I will read this to you now. A team captain just simply doesn't abandon ship when it is navigating rough seas. What Simone Biles did is not what a team captain does in the middle of a competition. Disappointing. That's what one anonymous person wrote. And I know how difficult it is as Black women to resist the impetus to prove our worth through our actions and through our productivity. But I would challenge us to resist, to practice that muscle of resistance, because rest really is the revolution. It is the beginning of the revolution, because right now the answer for me is resist the urge to endanger our own well-being. It starts with self-preservation. It's about finding community. It's about creating a physical space that promotes relaxation and harmony within you and with your environment. And it is about setting boundaries for yourself. And that's extremely difficult for me as someone who is still working through my people pleaser habits, working through it. But it is so important to know what your boundaries are and to practice communicating them, because we think that once we know what they are, that we will automatically know how to communicate them, but that is not so. You can know yourself extremely well and not know how to present yourself to other people, and not know how to communicate who you are with other people in a way that is digestible for them. And that can be through an email saying, I am taking a minute of rest, or I am unavailable after 5 p.m., or I will only answer emails from this bracket of time to this bracket of time. It can be a conversation face-to-face of, I enjoy spending time with you, but during these hours of the day, I need to spend time with myself. I treasure you, and I hope that we find some sort of compromise. It can be anything of that nature. And I would implore all of us to get into the habit of practicing communicating our boundaries and to stick by them, regardless of how the other side responds. So just keep those cute things in mind. Okay. Well, that is the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have enjoyed your time here. Again, this is Plot Twist Please. Like this, subscribe, and send it to your pals if you feel so led. Stay weird, y'all. Bye. Mwah.